Hello and welcome back to another YouTube video. Today I'm doing the 25.8 ADC tier list. So if you're content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There are a couple of changes towards the bot lane role this patch. We saw a nerf to Tristana and then a buff to Mel, Hui, and Zeri. In the case of Hui, he got over nerfed and they have given him something back as compensation. In the case of Zeri, she'd kind of fallen a bit weaker, but the nerfs towards Yumi also kind of encouraged a Zeri buff because she was going to lose some direct power through that. And then Mel, who was intentionally kept weak for a while whilst Riot kind of like measured her strength, has been buffed up as she is still like performing quite poorly, and hopefully does start to see some level of play, kind of comes back into the picture as a champion a bit more. Starting with the D tier event, we do lead off with Kalista, who is the only D tier champion at the moment. She's really struggling solo queue. This is to be expected. She is a very pro-jailed champion, if not just the most pro-jailed champion in the game at the moment. Her ban rate's really high there. She doesn't see an awfully large amount of play, whereas on the flip side in solo queue, she is one of the worst performing marksmen. She's still really good if you pilot her incredibly well and you're like duoing with someone. I think this champion can still have extreme amounts of value. I don't think there's any, I would say, outright terrible marksman, but she is being nerfed going into 25.9 purely because of her competitive skew. If you are playing this champion, you need to be very good at it, and you need to be primarily playing it with someone who you're very like familiar with and what kind of champions are going to bring out. Otherwise, this pick does just innately lose a lot of value. Probably the pick I just recommend avoiding the most this patch. If you don't already play it, don't start playing it. It is being nerfed quite heavily going into 25.9 as well. Being bumped up from the D tier to the C tier is Mel. She sits towards the high end of the C tier. I do believe long term that bot lane will be Mel's most performant role. She's still under the bar. I think she could do with a bit more to really solidify herself as a solid option again, but I wouldn't consider her bad anymore. I'd say she is just a bit on the weak side. If you are looking to pick Mel up, probably now is a good time to start learning the champion. I wouldn't be surprised if she gets a buff in, let's say, 25.10 to kind of enable her to compete with some of the better options in mid, in bot lane, for example. Other picks within the C tier mostly remain the same. The likes of Brand really just aren't that performant at the moment. He is very easy to play. That is like the merit of him in this like elo bracket, in the mid elo bracket. If he wasn't easy to play, this champion would probably be in the D tier at the moment. I think his numbers are just too low. He has been buffed up substantially for jungle, but even then he still falls slightly under the radar, and in mid bot lane support he is still an underperformant champion option. If you do want to play him in the bot lane, you also kind of want to be pairing him alongside the likes of Nami. So the other C tier options aren't per se bad, but they're just harder to pilot and require a lot of resources and like very good management of the champion to really get value out of them. The likes of Samir and Draven require very big advantages within the game, and then are forced to close out the game early, which traditionally just doesn't happen as consistently in mid and low elo, where the game duration is substantially longer than it is in elite. On the flip side, if you are playing in certain regions, then FFs will happen earlier and these champions can get more value, so something to be cognitive of. But for the most part, I wouldn't recommend these picks unless you're very comfortable on them and you're very comfortable closing out games. They are not good consistent win conditions a lot of the time. In the case of Ezreal, he is very pilot driven. If you can pilot him really well, he's still a very good marksman. If you don't pilot him very well, I think this champion kind of falls beneath other options. He's not as consistent, requires the consistent rotation of skill shots and maintaining uptime on like his passive to really get value out of the pick. If you're not comfortable with this playstyle, I'd recommend avoiding him entirely, but if you can play him, then he's still a decent option in that regard. I think if Aphelios is underrated, I do kind of just want this champion to be buffed. I think it would be nice to see more Aphelioses. I think this champion isn't absurdly popular either, and he doesn't break any level of ban rates at the moment, but he's decent. If you're very comfortable on him, you can definitely make this champion work. He is a pretty heavily OTP played champion though, and most of them do make it work. I think if you do want to play a lot of this champion though, you want to sink time into him to really like learn the kind of rotations and making sure you're getting the most out of this guy's kit. Some of the other champions within the C tier include the likes of Kaiser, who is doing a bit better with her buffs more recently. They wanted to kind of encourage, I mean, she's always going to be one of the most played marksmen within the game with just how her kit functions. I believe the best way to play her right now is primarily the Ginsu variant, where you go either Kraken or Static into Ginsu into Nasha. I've seen some Yuntao Kaisers. I think it's fine in certain games, but I think as a default option, I just don't think it's quite as good. Obviously, this is all subject to opinion. I think other people really heavily emphasize just how like valuable Yuntao's Kaiser can be, but I think it just comes down to what you're comfortable with and what you want to play with in the game. And then Lux is the other AP option within the C tier. I think she's fine. She's got good wave clear, good burst damage, just requires a lot of gold to really be functional, and tends to be predicated on certain pairings to get more value out of the kit. Solid C tier option. If you already play the champion, you'll continue to play the champion. If you don't, it's not a pick I'd recommend, but it is there as an option. Zeri also remains towards the high end of the C tier. Both Zeri and Mel could possibly be bumped up to the B tier if other things come down a bit. She got buffed this patch. It was basically nothing. It didn't really change a huge amount of the champion. Just makes her a bit more ult reliant when she was already kind of ult reliant in a lot of the senses. So yeah, remains as a C tier option. Yuumi being nerfed this patch basically stripped away a lot of what was the win rate gain of this change. Moving on to the B tier, then we lead off with Xayah. I think situationally, great champion. I think just as a blind pick, she's kind of underwhelming. You need to play this champion in the right compositions to really get value out of her. You could argue that she could get bumped up to the A tier. I think if you blind this champion, she sits as more like a C tier option. It's not a pick I really recommend, but if you are able to bring it out and you already play it in the right spots, I think she's decent. I think she's a solid B tier pick at the moment. Some of the AP options within the B tier include the likes of Victor, Ziggs, and Veigar. In the case of Victor, his play rate has really heavily declined. Obviously, a lot of it came from Arcane and the ASU on this champion. He did also receive a string of buffs and then a string of nerfs to follow. I think this pick is still fine. I think if you're very comfortable playing Victor bot lane, you can still make him work. If you don't already play him though, you're probably not going to pick him up. It's the case with some of these AP options where if you don't already play them, it can be a bit of a question of whether they're actually worth investing time into. In the case of Victor, probably not at the moment, but it's still a fine option if you already play him. I think Ziggs is a nice champion to have within your arsenal, as he's one of the more consistent mainstay options as like AP picks within the bot lane. That being said though, I think he's just weak at the moment. I think this pick really struggles with some of the itemization. Some of the nerfs he received towards the end of last year also hurt him quite badly. And I'd overall just say he's alright. Like, if you are comfortable playing an AP artillery mage in the bot lane, then Ziggs can be nice. If you're not, then he's not necessary at the moment. I just think he's an okay champion to have within your pool. But I think there are better AP options in the current state of the game. Veigar, incredibly a low elo skewed pick. If you're very comfortable playing this champion to, like, Diamond, he probably sits as, like, an AS tier pick within the bot lane. The higher up you go, though, just champion quite aggressively falls down. You tend to be pretty predicated on like people walking into your cage and just not understanding how to play against this champion, and the game's going long enough that you can really heavily stack and just output a huge amount of damage within the game. In the case of Smolder, sits as a pretty solid B tier option. Most of the B tier picks are just, I think they're okay, but they're maybe slightly weaker than some of the A tier alternative options, whether that's because of like certain compositions you want to bring them out in, or not having as much agency in the game. I think Smolder probably falls into the latter, where the champion doesn't quite have as much agency as some of the other marksmen, but if you can get to like certain stack thresholds, this pick can be really good, and he's a great win condition champion when you reach those points. So lower down you go, the more consistent you get stacks. The higher up you go, you do need to be able to trade more frequently within lane. That is going to be one of the things that has to come through on this champion. In the case of Varus, he's probably number one blind competitive pick at the moment. Whereas Kalista sees a lot of bans, Varus sees a lot of picks. I think this champion obviously has two things going for it, and that's having the variation between both lethality and on hit. In solo queue though, you don't tend to get given as much setup time. His ultimate tends to be an ability you want to be like have people play around, and you also just won't see that consistency, which is why I think he does fall as more like a B tier pick in solo queue. But if you're very comfortable on him, you're willing to take him into elite, you maybe play like in a team, or then I think Varus is an incredible option still, and definitely one of the premier picks if you are like playing within that environment. For climbing though, I don't think I really recommend Varus as much. I think he's just a staple option, if anything. Corki's an incredibly good early game marksman, falls off really hard, which can definitely be a pretty big markdown in low elo, where games will consistently go longer and people just won't close out as much, as consistently. I think the difference between Corki and like Samira and Draven, for example, though, is the fact that Corki's just easier to play. Like, you are more consistently going to get results earlier on into the curve. But if you are looking to master a champion, I would recommend Samira and Draven over Corki. That being said, though, yeah, pick him up if you are looking for an early game champion which you can really heavily skirmish lane with, and then like kind of take over. Does fall off quite aggressively later on to the game, though, so you do want to consistently close out whilst you are still one of the stronger champions within the game. Sivir is alright. I think this pick can do a good job at like stalling out lanes and just holding them and innately just scaling up and having good AoE splash damage within team fights. Don't think she's as consistent of like a win con. Well, I mean, she has a consistent win con, but doesn't have as much agency early on to the game. That is probably one of the biggest pain points of the champion. But if you can get to like 1, 2, 3 items within the game, Sivir is a great champion, and I do like really value her in that aspect. If you can get her in a good lane, I think this pick can be really good. It's kind of like Xayah, but pretty similar, where you want good matchups for these champions, and then you'll eventually get the value which you kind of pick these champions for. So yeah, Sivir sits as a B tier option at the moment. Moving up to the A tier then, we have Lucian. Lucian's doing a bit better in solo queue at the moment. He was kind of on the downward until he got buffed. They took 3 seconds off his E, which is a huge buff to give this champion, as it kind of comes in at like, I mean, it's going to be a buff all the way up until like level 13, which obviously, but it like will decline as you like put points in the ability, obviously. It's nice. It's a really good buff for like a champion which is already kind of like mid-game skewed, and I think it really emphasizes where you can have value on Lucian within the game. Does a huge amount of damage when paired with like certain things. Like, you can pair him with Engage, you can pair him with the likes of Nami still, and I think this pick does have pretty good spots in the game at the moment. So yeah, I'd say he's a solid A tier champion. Hui is also moving up to the A tier. I already was a huge fan of Hui bot lane. I think Hui bot lane is a really strong pick. The nerfs were too much, which he received back along, and the buffs this patch have kind of pushed him back up as a solid A tier pick. I don't think he's the best bot lane option at the moment, but I think he's still really strong in this role. And if you want to pair him with some, and if you're looking for like other AP options, I still think Karthus and I think Swain are like the other two which I'd have around a similar kind of point. Karthus does huge amounts of damage, but it's kind of like the reason you are picking Karthus, because of his ultimate and how much DPS this pick can output. Swain is a lot more compositional dependent, but in the right comps, this pick is one of the best champions within the game. So I don't recommend sleeping on him. If you can pick him in the right spot, I think this pick is very good. So I'd recommend trying Swain at least in certain games and just really getting a feel for the pick. Some of the solo queue orientated picks right now are like your Twitches and your Vaynes. I think Twitch is bit weaker than Vayne. I'd have them separated by maybe like Caitlyn, for example, but yeah, Twitch is still very solo queue skewed. The nerfs towards Yuumi this patch do hurt him. You could argue that probably puts him towards the lower end of the A tier, but he could still be really valuable within this elo bracket, especially if you main the champion. In case of Vayne, I think she is also an incredibly good low to mid elo skewed pick, oftentimes given the freedom of laning phase where people won't punish you as hard, and then you can scale up and really like take over fights later on into the game. In the case of Caitlyn, I do believe you have to be really good at playing this champion to get the value you want to be getting out of this pick. If you pick her and then you're kind of not really getting advantages within the lane, I think that loses a lot of the value of the champion. But if you're comfortable getting those advantages and then scaling up to like 3-4 items where you can start like carving back up into the game again, I think this pick can be really good. But you do need to be able to push early advantages with your 650 range. If you don't do that, I'd recommend using a different champion in the bot lane. Still really good though in the right spots. Ashe, I think, could also probably be pushed towards the lower end of the A tier at the moment. She isn't performing as well on the current patch, but is being buffed in 25.9, so I'd recommend learning the champion if you haven't already. That being said though, most people already have Ashe within their arsenal. She's a great utility pick, and I think you should always have Ashe as just an accessible champion, which you can opt into if she ever really appears towards the top of the meta at any point. Other picks within the A tier include Seraphine, and Tristana is going to get the drop down. In the case of Seraphine, I think she is probably my most recommendable AP option at the moment, being a really good jack of all trades champion, having great utility, heals, shields, CC, damage. There's just a lot of things really going for this champion at the moment. I think she's a pretty easy laning phase, scales relatively well, and yeah, I really like her for that reason. In the case of Tristana, she got nerfed this patch. She was creeping up over time as like a really good bot lane option. The nerfs were put a kind of back into a more reasonable spot, and I think she sits towards the high end of the A tier. As time goes on, though, I wouldn't be surprised if she was to get bumped back up into the S tier if she starts performing really well again. But yeah, Tristana definitely a bit weaker with those nerfs to her ultimate. Moving up to the S tier is Jhin. I think Jhin has the buffs which he received not too long ago really helped him, and like general shifts in some of the champions which have been nerfed have also really helped Jhin solidify himself as a really good premier like pick within the bot lane role. He is the most popular marksman within the game at the moment in like gold plus brackets, so you will be contested if you are looking to play this pick, but he is really good in his current state. Some of the more niche options are like your Nylas and your Kog'Maws, where in the right spots, these are some of the best picks within the game. I think Nyla as a counter pick might be the best marksman in the right spots if you already play her and you are like pairing her with the right champions. I wouldn't recommend blinding her. I think she can struggle into some lanes and certain compositions, but this pick is blatantly overpowered in her current state. The only reason why I don't nerf her is because she's just unpopular and doesn't eat a lot of ban rate. In the case of Kog'Maw, he's, I'd say, a bit lower than Nyla, but a bit more journalistic. You can play Kog'Maw into a lot of compositions, and if you're looking for a hyper carry, he is very good in his current state. He's also pretty unpopular, so you won't usually be contested and doesn't eat a huge amount of ban rate. Yasuo, I think, is one of the best champions, which is kind of, it's like the Lux of mid lane, where I think Lux mid lane is really good within average elos, but she's already really popular, and I don't know if people quite appreciate her for that reason. I think Yasuo's the same. I think Yasuo's an incredibly good bot laner at the moment. He is obviously very popular in like 3 roles, or 2 roles, and then bot lane. Bot lane isn't as popular of a role, but Yasuo still really good here. It provides him a lot of what he wants to be playing into. The wind wall has huge amounts of value against a lot of the marksmen, and his ability to just gap close onto a champion paired with certain knockup picks just gives him so much value as a champion here. The other 2 marksman picks in the S tier are MF and Jinx. MF obviously is the premier, probably like caster marksman, where you can opt into lethality. You can opt into crit in certain games and get good value out of this champion. She's easy to play her with setup, and you should get good value out of the champion. And Jinx is the premier marksman of the patch, the hyper carry, where if you get 2 kills early onto the game, you can just find yourself being able to snowball and take over. Solo queue is a great environment for Jinx. I think she does struggle in elite play a lot more, where people will punish you a decent amount more in lane, but this pick is doing really well at the moment. I think even with the nerfs she received not too long ago, she still solidifies herself as a top tier marksman, and it's the pick I probably recommend playing this patch. But if you're looking for a lot of options, then I think there is a lot of those options at the moment. I think the ADC meta is one of the more open kind of like spaces it's been in, where you can pick most champions and consistently like either outperform if you're comfortable on them, or be able to go toe to toe with some of the like considered S tier options in the current state of the game. So try and see what you like. I recommend the likes of Jinx and MF because I think they're options which have clear win cons and are like easier to play in certain regards. If you're looking for something a bit more utility centric, then like Ashe and Jhin are still great options. And I think if you're looking for something a bit more niche, then yeah, your Yasuo's, your Nylas, your Kog'Maws are all really good picks. Those are my thoughts. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.